Top raid units in Grand Summoners. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're going to be talking about today because raids have returned. And I'm actually surprised I never made a video like this before. I actually thought I did, so that's why I never even pursued thought of attempting this. But it wasn't until Easy in my Discord actually was like, hey, OP, you should make this. It'd be cool. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the best units to be bringing onto raids. Now, this video, I'm not going to lie to you, is kind of hard to make because I didn't want to make it a top 5. I didn't want to make it a top 10. There's just a lot of good units that I really want to talk about. But also, it's kind of weird because I can't really break it up into just like attackers, supports, tanks. I feel like for some reason it's a little bit more complicated or convoluted than that. Just because you sometimes use one unit and one unit could be an attacker for this team, but then technically it's more of a support unit because they're able to buff up this other unit, and you see the point. Yeah. Now, of course, units aren't everything in raids. They're a big portion of it, but also, you know, making sure you have the right equips and all that as well is going to benefit you a ton. So making sure you have those AoE arch gen items, damage buff items, best in slot stuff, all that to make sure that you are as strong as possible when you go into the raids, because of course you're trying to deal as much damage as possible. Which leads us on to our first unit, and that is none other than our boy Vox. Ladies and gentlemen, this guy is like the king of raids. If you said raids had a poster boy, it would be Vox. There's a lot of reasons to why Vox is so good in raids, but one of the main one is not just because he's an insane attacker, it's because he's a 100% crit buffer. Not only is he a 100% crit buffer, he also is able to heal his team if they ever need it, and also offering a minor attack buff, I think at 20 or 30%. Overall, Vox is just like the be-all end-all king of raids, and he's pretty much in everybody's raid team. I can't think of a team without Vox unless they're using someone like Decilia maybe, and some people don't run Vox, but even then you could still run Decilia and Vox together. And if you don't have Vox, I really wouldn't worry too much because you can easily replace him with someone that is also 100% crit buffer. Luan just came out, fantastic unit. Hiei, Water Malia, if you wanted to, hell, even Regulus, you know, the list goes on. But having 100% crit buff for your team is going to benefit them a ton because, of course, these raid bosses have tons of HP, tons of defense, and tons of damage mitigation. So being able to eliminate one of those, which would be the defense, because of crit chance, you'll be able to deal so much more damage. So yeah, if you don't have Vox, I recommend some way, somehow you put a 100% crit buffer in your team because they're just going to do wonders for you. And since Vox got recommended, I'm actually going to recommend 3 different units right here, and that's going to be Sistina, Swick, and none other than New Year's Rimmaru, which is the newest edition. The reason why all these guys are recommended here, if you're doing anything with a physical damage dealer like Vox, or just a team that's mostly physical damage, you're definitely going to want one of these guys. Swick is kind of a weaker Sistina to an extent. He does have to get in Magia, so he is a little bit slower, but once he's in Magia Drive, you know, he can give you that 100% physical damage buff. He can also give you art gen. He has really good slots for raids. Having that 5-star defense is definitely clutch, helps you lower the damage that you take by a ton. And Sistina is a little bit more safer, and overall she's just a little bit more well-rounded because she's able to give you that barrier. Her slots are fantastic, and she increases the damage the enemy takes by 30%, which is of course a multiplicative debuff, meaning that it multiplies your damage. Our newest addition, New Year's Rimmaru, is just disgusting. This guy technically can make anybody that is a physical damage dealer turn into a ramping attacker because how his true art works, every single time he casts it, he'll be increasing everyone's physical damage by 50%. His true art isn't the fastest though, I will say that, so it's not like an insane amount that you can get to, but you can definitely get this up to like 150, 200, possibly even more. So he is a fantastic unit, and I definitely will tell you guys, just watch out for him because he's going to be everywhere in this raid. But if you're using a more magic damage focused team, the unit that comes to mind that you should absolutely use if you have him is going to be Santa Rimmaru. The man's going to be insane for any type of magic attacker. So let's take a break from damage real quick and talk about survivability. If you are struggling to stay alive in raids or just dying a lot, whatever the case may be, I highly recommend that you run a taunt tank like Thetis. Thetis is probably the best option because he's just able to take all the damage that the raid boss would deal and just completely reduce it to like nothing. The only problem with Thetis though is that he unfortunately reduces your damage by quite a bit because that slot could be filled with another support unit that's either giving you more damage buffs or dealing more damage theirself, or that could have been filled with another DPS unit. So you see what I mean? It's not the best case scenario to always use Thetis, but in some raids he's pretty much required just because the amount of damage the boss deals is OD. So definitely recommend using Thetis if you're struggling to stay alive. Ain't no shame in it. Hey man, do what you gotta do to stay alive and beat them raid bosses. But now going right back to DPS, let's talk about the big boys, the ramping damage dealers. All of these units are fantastic for raids. If you got Yusuke, you got Decilia, Juno, hell, even Shion that came out recently if you want to use her. There's tons of options here for this ramping damage dealer if you want to use them. You don't have to use them, they're not required by any means, but if you want to super optimize like a very specific ramping damage dealer and use them in raids. So a ramping damage dealer may appeal to some people. Just know that most of them have a slow start because it's a ramping damage dealer, unless you're using someone like Juno, because Juno gets all of her buffs instantly as soon as she uses one of her true arts. And then finally, let us talk about the guys that is the backbone of the team, man. These guys will support your team, make sure you don't die, give you sustain, healing, all that type of stuff, and that is the support units. Now, unfortunately, every single support unit that is top tier is from a crossover. Trash! We're gonna name a few right now that will definitely benefit you, but if you don't have some of these, just slot in whatever you have, and that will be like best case scenario for you. What we're mainly looking for in raids is stuff like archgen, stuff like healing, damage buffs, all that type of stuff. So the main one that I can recommend, even as like someone newer to the game, whatever the case may be, or if you've been playing the game for a while, is always Earthfin. Earthfin is fantastic. He doesn't deal that much damage though, but my god, he will support your team and he will hard carry you in the archgen department. That's all I'm gonna say. Let me just mention too, you can also use Darkfin in the slot if you have him instead of Earthfin. It's perfectly fine. But if you have access to the crossover units or the CTB units, my god, dude, get ready, because Mako is probably the best support for any raid that is currently out there. Mako is by far hands down the best support, just because she's able to give you that arts damage buff, that healing, and the art gauge. Now, later on down the line, there will be another unit that's very similar to Mako that comes out, which is going to be Haruto, and Haruto will also be able to fill this slot. He is like the GS version of Mako, and I highly recommend you pick him up if you don't have Mako. But if you have Mako right now, use her. She helps your team do so much more damage. Highly recommend that you use Mako if you have her. If you don't have Mako, you can also use someone like a Serpa. A Serpa is more of the defensive powerhouse support compared to the offensive powerhouse support that Mako is. I promise you, if you have a Serpa on your team, you're probably not dying anytime soon. Now, if you don't have a Serpa, of course, someone like Priestess, Rimmaru, Santa Rimmaru, all those guys are also fantastic. If you don't have them, there's also Lisa. Lisa's fantastic in raids as well, being able to reduce everybody's equipment CT by a pretty large margin. Not only that, she can just spam her stuff all the time because of her majesty stacks. She also does pretty good damage herself, and she has a lot of potential. But of course, if you don't have like any of those type of support units, using whatever you have at the moment is perfectly fine as well. Just make sure that you have some archgeners on your team at the very least, if that's all you can do. But that's all I want to say for all the units. I hope that it helps you guys in building your team comps and everything, and trying to decide which unit should be on the team and which unit shouldn't. Now, of course, I will actually recommend some team comps right here for you if you are interested and kind of want to see some more ideology in this. In raids, you have two team comps. A very common strategy is to use Tasman, so we're going to always consider that the first team is a Tasman team. So the second team comes in with 100 art gauge. One popular team that I would use that is kind of just the staple is using someone like Vox, Juno, Sistina, and Mako. In this team comp, we have pretty good archgen. We have a lot of damage because of the Vox and Sistina combo. Juno is also going to be able to dish out some pretty sizable damage herself. We won't really have to worry about arts or possibly even dying against most bosses in this fight. Another team that I want to recommend is actually going to be using New Year's Rimmaru, Decilia, Mako, and literally any support unit, whether that be Finn, a Serpa, doesn't really matter, or even Sistina. Of course, in this team comp, it is catered to getting Decilia up as fast as possible, but not only getting her up as fast as possible, also making sure that she can hit as hard as possible. Because of the extra physical damage that New Year's Rimmaru will be giving Decilia, Decilia will be able to stack even more deeps, meaning that she's going to hit even harder, which is just insane. There's two team comps for you to kind of give you an idea of what to do. But guys, it's going to be it for this video, man. Thank you all for coming out again. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. Tell me down below what your raid teams are. And also, I would like to announce too that we are probably going to be streaming raids sometimes this week. I haven't picked out a day yet, but it's probably going to happen at some point. So stay tuned to the channel for that. But guys, thank you all for coming out again. It's been your boy OP. And last but not least, man, don't forget to drink water.